Everyone, here's my title, and I have also, or we have also slightly modified the title. The global is a bit dangerous word, but so we made it regional. And as indicated here, this is about pollen-based climate reconstructions using pollen databases. And for example, Rashid already made it clear that this paleoclimatic use is one reason why the pollen databases were established in the 1980s. Not the only reason, but one of the reasons. And so I will give this presentation. Jon has done a lot of work for this presentation, and there are also some other people who have a role in this presentation. So let's take a look. So what seems to be still a fact, at least as I can see it, is that this need for quantitative paleoclimate information is increasing. There is clear evidence that more quantitative reconstructions will be done in the future, and this will include the pollen part as well. And if you look at the recent publications and papers, especially this paleoclimate model validation seems to be a field where pollen-based and other proxy-based climate reconstructions are needed. Because we have new generations of paleoclimate models, and they must be validated using proxy data. And this is reflected in many recent publications, which mostly focus on, for example, in terms of Holocene only, they focus on this certain interesting mismatches between the proxy data and the paleoclimate model data. Some people like to call this the Holocene Conundrum. And one key point is Holocene Conundrum is a possible seasonal bias in proxy data. So, for example, is there a seasonal bias in pollen-based climate reconstructions or not? And in this very recent Nature paper, the authors argue that this seasonal bias might actually be the reason why there's a mismatch between models and proxy data. But this doesn't include pollen, it's marine data on this paper. Okay, so another fact seems to be that the pollen data remain one of the most important tools for quantitative paleoclimate reconstructions. So most of us know that pollen have been used a long time for climate reconstructions, even quantitative climate reconstructions since the 1970s. And there's been a lot of debate and discussion, but it hasn't gone away. There's still clearly a need for new pollen-based climate reconstructions. So, for example, if you look at this very recent Holocene paleotemperature database, which is now a database comparable to pollen databases, freely available, temperature only, no precipitation in this database. So if you look at different proxy records, we can see that the pollen-based reconstructions are the dominant kind of reconstructions. 319 pollen-based reconstructions. So if you compare with other proxy kind of data, the numbers are lower. So still much what we know about, or we think we know about the Holocene climate or pre-Holocene climate, especially in quantitative terms, is based on pollen data. Mostly because polar records are so global, almost globally available. But then the fact is that quantitative climate reconstruction from pollen always require modern pollen data. And that's where the pollen databases become critical. So to make climate reconstructions from pollen, we have two possibilities. Either we can make a locally constructed calibration model, pollen climate calibration model. We then probably have a better quality control. But if you want to increase the number of sites in the database, then you must use existing database. So, for example, the North American pollen database or the European pollen databases can be used. And these days, as you already have seen, they include a very high number, many thousands of record sites. So they are really massive databases for pollen climate reconstructions now. So then, how do we know what kind of database we can make based on the pollen databases? Should we take the all existing records, or should we somehow restrict the number of pollen records in our database? So regionally restricted database, or take all the possible records almost globally as we can do. So the impact of this decision we tested together with Jon and other colleagues using one of the best long pollen records in Europe, possibly even globally, from Padul, which is a site in southern Spain. The record goes back 200,000 years, but there's actually much longer sediment record in this tectonic basin, which has existed since the mid-Miocene or something. So here we don't probably have so much human impact. It goes back over the last glacial cycle. And here then is the European pollen database we used for the reconstructions, indicating the sites. This is what we call the whole Europe, west of 40 degrees east. But we also made two subsets indicated here, Morocco, Iberia, France, and even as one subset of that, and the Padul location is indicated. So here is the great pollen diagram from Padul. You will quickly see that it's dominated by very few pollen types, mostly Quercus, Pinus, and some herbs. And I have no time to talk about the methodological details. We made the reconstruction using WPLS, which is these days a routine technique, but certainly one of the best ones. And we had 3 different calibration models in this test. So the full European calibration model, which I showed on the previous slide, a subset from that, we call Morocco, Iberia, France subset, and then even a subset of that, which is low altitude only from the Morocco, Iberia, France calibration model. And here is the critical thing. When you look at the pollen diagram like this and you make a climate reconstruction, you see it's dominated by few pollen types, and these types will drive the reconstruction. So Pinus here is very dominant, has values between 60, 80, 90%, and that's very high now. And what makes it hard to model the climatic response of Pinus in this part of the world is the fact that there are multiple species included in this pollen. And these have different ecological characteristics. So some prefer more arid ecological conditions or climatic conditions, some more humid climatic conditions. And of course, the pollen type then summarizes the climatic responses of all these types. And what happens is that I have no time to go into details, but the reason why we made the reconstruction using lowlands only, low altitude only, is that if you include mountains, high altitude, that's where Pinus pollen is very dominant because pine often covers the mountain like in the Pyrenees. And of course, when you go to high altitude, temperature goes down and the precipitation increases. So this makes the moisture index very, very high in the mountains. So it drives the Pinus pollen type as a strong indicator of humid conditions, high moisture index. So then we all know enough of the trees. Is pine really an indicator of high moisture index, or is it simply a generalist which can grow where other species can't grow? So these kind of decisions are really critically important in the reconstructions. When we make the reconstructions here, I show them 3 different subsets. This is the European calibration model, the whole Europe. And you can see that this goes back to 1,000 years. Here's Indian, fairly high moisture index. Stage 4, marine isotope stage 4, this is humid as well, makes sense, high moisture index, and then high moisture index in the late glacial and last glacial max. And in the Holocene actually the moisture index goes down. This is strongly driven by pilot. And then this is a Morocco Iberia France calibration model. Still we see the same features, high moisture index in the last glacial maximum and dry conditions in the Holocene. And finally, the Morocco Iberia France lowland calibration model. Now the mountains are excluded. And now we see how big difference this makes. Suddenly, Holocene becomes wet. It has a higher moisture index values than, for example, the last glacial max. So now we then can ask, was the Holocene in the Iberian Peninsula, was it wet or was it dry? And if you want to show it was dry, we can use these two first calibration models. If you want to stress that it was wet, we can show this low altitude calibration model. So this is in a few minutes to summarize the impact of making decision regarding the calibration model. Okay, so very quickly, conclusions. The selection and design of the calibration model. These are critically important steps in pollen-based land reconstruction when using regional scale pollen data. And second conclusion, I don't think there's a simple, easy way to decide what is the right calibration model when we are dealing under these conditions. Okay, finally, this is Padul. It's a very interesting site. As I said, the sediment record is probably millions of years old. It's a fantastic extensional Teton basin. Thank you for listening. And I also want to thank Eric for, especially when I was a young student, early 1990s, and I was introduced to Telia at that time. Had a big impact in my life. Okay, thank you.